Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Larry Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Doyle, and I'm happy you chose to spend time with us today. Now, let's get comfortable and grab yourself something to drink as we get into today's session. Today, I want to step back from specific cases, specific agencies, and even specific injustices and talk about something deeper. I want to talk about the law itself and what the law says on paper, but what the law has become. There's a legal scholar, Albert Alschuler, who wrote a book called Law Without Values. And in that work, he makes a powerful argument that modern law, especially since Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., has been on a downward path. And that's a strong statement, a downward path. So, what does that mean? Holmes helped shape a way of thinking about law that stripped it away from morality. He argued that the law is not about what is right or wrong, but about what courts will do in fact. In other words, law became something less about justice and more about prediction, less about truth and more about outcomes. And when you take morality out of the law, something dangerous happens. Because if the law is no longer grounded in right and wrong, then what is it grounded in? Power, influence, politics, and that's exactly what we're seeing today. Now let's talk about the Supreme Court. In theory, the Supreme Court is supposed to be the final guardian of the Constitution, a neutral body, a place where law is interpreted, not created, and certainly not manipulated. But what we see today is something very different. We see confirmation hearings that are political battles. We see justices being appointed not just for their qualifications, but for the expected ideological outcomes. And once they're on the bench, we increasingly see decisions that align with the political party that appointed them. Now, people will argue about that. They'll say, no, courts are still neutral. But step back and look at the pattern. When decisions consistently fall along predictable political lines, that's not coincidence. That's a system that has drifted. And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. This isn't about politics. It's not about a loss of values. It's not about the loss of moral grounding in the law itself, because law was never supposed to exist in a vacuum. The founders didn't create a system where the law was detached from morality. They created a system rooted in the idea that there are fundamental truths, that right and wrong exist, that justice is not flexible depending on who holds power. When we lose that, we don't just lose good decisions, we lose legitimacy. Let me say that again, because this is important. When the law loses its moral foundation, it loses its legitimacy. And once people stop believing in legitimacy of the law, they stop trusting it, they stop respecting it, and eventually they stop following it. That's not theory, that's history. Now I want to talk about something else, something I've seen personally over the years of dealing with institutions. When morality leaves the system, people inside that system begin to justify things they would never have justified before. They say things like, I'm just doing my job. That's policy. That's how the system works. And before long, the focus shifts from doing what is right to doing what is allowed. That's a dangerous place to be, because what is allowed is not always what is right, and what is legal is not always what is just. Let me put this another way that makes sense to all of us. Think about a playground. You've got a group of kids, and there are rules posted on the wall. No running, no pushing, take turns. Those are the rules. That's the law. But what actually keeps that playground safe isn't just the rules, it's the values the kids are taught. Things like fairness, respect, not hurting someone smaller than you. Now imagine the playground where the kids follow only the written rules, nothing else. There's a big kid who figures out he can stand in front of the slide and block everyone. He's not pushing anyone. He's not breaking a rule. So technically, he's doing nothing wrong. But everyone on that playground knows what he's doing isn't right. Or imagine a group of kids who take turns, but they manipulate the system. They rotate so fast or exclude others in ways that don't technically violate the rules. Again, no rule is broken, but fairness is gone. Now take that one step further. Imagine the adults watching that playground say, well, no rules were broken, so there's no problem. At that moment, the playground stops being a safe place, not because there are no rules, but because the rules are no longer guided by values. That's what happens to a legal system without morals. You end up with people and institutions that don't ask, is this right? They ask, can I get away with it? And when that becomes the standard, you can follow every rule on paper and still create injustice in reality. The law was never meant to be just a list of rules. It was meant to reflect something deeper. The playground only works when the rules and values work together, and the same is true in our system of the law. When you separate the two, you don't get neutrality, you get exploitation. So when Alschuler talks about law without values, he's not just talking about theory, he's describing a system where law has been separated from the very thing that gives it meaning: values, morals, a sense of right and wrong. Now let's connect this to where we are today. When you see agencies ignoring court orders, when you see records that should exist suddenly not found, when you see decisions that seem to follow political lines instead of legal principles, you're not just seeing isolated problems. And here's the hard truth. You can't fix that with more rules. You can't fix it with more procedures, because the problem isn't a lack of law. The problem is a lack of values guiding the law. So what do? We start by recognizing it. We start by talking about it. We start by refusing to accept that this is just the way things are, because the law was never meant to be just a tool of power. It was meant to be a safeguard of justice. And justice, real justice, requires something more than statutes and decisions. It requires integrity. It requires accountability. And above all, it requires a commitment to what is right, even if it is inconvenient. If we want to restore trust in the law, we have to restore the values that gave it meaning in the first place. Because without values, law becomes nothing more than authority without legitimacy. And that, my friends, is a very dangerous place for any society to be. If this resonated with you, if you see these things, felt these things, or lived through them, you're not alone. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the more people start talking and asking questions, the harder it becomes to ignore what's happening. Stay safe, and we'll be back with more.